So, Russell, it is just great to see you. Great to be connecting here with you here on Zoom, our miracle technology, to discuss Tommy before he ever moved out of Sioux City. And I'd first like to start with you, maybe talking a little bit about how your own being a musician developed in Sioux City in terms of when you got your first drum kit, when you first started getting serious, and how you were able to then start playing out with people.
Um, Come from a family of musicians. My grandfather was a trumpet player. My dad was a drummer, and both my brothers played instruments. One was a trumpet player, and the other brother was a saxophone player. And so that's how it all started. My dad would, do gigs and stuff like that, and take me to the rehearsals and stuff like that. So I've been doing it all of my life. I didn't decide to be a professional musician until in my teen years, and so that was my interest in it. It kept me out of trouble, and the guys that my age and older that I would gravitate towards were Tommy was in that group, and that was active in the community and playing music and was a great musician. Even back then, you could see the potential that he had something special in his sound and his playing and just his enthusiasm for music. And so gravitated towards guys like that and John Bartle and some other guys around. Pretty small community in Sioux City, speaking of the music community. So we all had a chance to cross paths and get together and jam and do some gigs and stuff, and so that's pretty much how it started, how I started.
So, do you remember when you would have felt confident enough from having? Did you take drum lessons? Was it like?
I did, yeah. My dad, and it was smart, him being a professional drummer, he played with the Ink Spot some years ago, and he didn't want to be my teacher, although I would just watch and listen. But he got me a private teacher when I was in middle school, and then my private teacher was also my band director in high school. So I had, formal lessons growing up.
So, when might have been the first time you actually played in a public, even if it was just a small room, a club, whatever? When was the first? How old were you when you first felt confident enough, had some chops to where you played out?
Yeah. It was at my grandfather's club. Had a nightclub called Club 711 there in Sioux City on the west side, and it was a musician's hang. So all of his buddies that would come through town, and some of the great musicians like Stimsy Hunter and Preston Love out of Omaha, Nebraska, were his buddies, and they would come down and play. And so, God, I don't even remember. I was really young. He would give me a chance. He was my encourager. My grandfather bought my first drum set. My dad didn't want me to be a musician, but my grandfather encouraged me and bought my first instrument and just started playing in my grandfather's club. And my grandfather was still doing some gigs, and my dad was his drummer. And I remember I was, I don't know, 13 or 14. My grandfather allowed me to sub for my dad when my dad couldn't um, make a couple of gigs. So I had a couple of gigs that I played like around 14 in my grandfather's group.
So, do you remember being nervous?
Oh, I was totally nervous, and They were all much older, older guys, mature guys, and excuse me, yeah, I was totally nervous. He, they were all had their whiskey in their flasks and their horn cases and stuff like that. My grandfather would sit with me on the breaks to make sure I wasn't doing anything bad, kind of thing. My early recollection was, like I said, his buddies were Stimsy Hunter, who was multi instrumentalist, but he was played in with Electric Flag. He was in Paul Butterfield's band, blues band back there in the day. Great bass player, great musician. I really loved him, Stimsy. And Preston Love, who was a bandmate of my grandfather's in Count Basie's band. And he had a great radio show in Omaha. And those guys, I like, they were such great musicians that I really looked up to them and hung out around them as much as I possibly could.
So, do you have a recollection on the first time or two? Anybody? How are the guys supporting you, or giving you approving looks, or maybe oops looks, or what? How quickly were you able to just join the groove?
Yeah, my my grandfather would have me just play time. He's look, don't play any fills, just play time, and that's going to give you your foundation kind of thing. So it was quarter notes on the bass drum, four on the floor, kind of thing. He wanted to instill in me a sense of playing good time, and he said, "That's it. That's what, like in a big band situation, you want that, kind of thing." So I did that for, maybe I didn't want to do that, but that was what he was one of my inspirations, and sort of wanted to be like my grandfather and stuff. And he was a businessman, and he was a pretty serious guy about music, and so I anything that he said I did or tried to do, and the guys around him would give me tips on what to play, what not to play, kind of thing, just to add to the music and not be chaotic and play a bunch of stuff. Back then, they call it the old school. So guys would, and that's not for everybody. I teach now, and I try not to teach the old school way, whereas they can be hard on you and hurt your feelings sometimes. If they didn't like what you were playing, or they would tell you so in such a way that would either hurt your feelings, and sometimes that crushes young people to where it's like, I'm don't want to feel this way. I never want to do this again. Or it's, I don't want to feel this way, and so I'm going to get better at doing what I need to do to play with others, kind of thing.
So what might have been? Do you have any recollection of what might have been that kind of Russell kind of kind of thing? What might have been said to you?
Um, I remember being, get up, we have another drummer. That said it all. It's like I'm just not doing it, kind of thing. And that's motivation there to, it's like, you know what, I hate that feeling. I don't want to feel that way ever again. What do I need to do to, so they got my attention. That gets my attention to want to do things right, and that respect of wanting to um, play in a way that people like to play with you.
So I would assume they would think you were a good listener and that you were actually responding.
Yeah, that makes all the difference. Yeah.
And so back then in Sioux City, how many clubs were there? Beyond, was there any beyond your grandfather's that would have jazz or blues or
Mhm.
have a be a place where other black musicians would be able to play?
Yeah. Then my grandfather's club, then, and I think he had a couple of different clubs. He had all the music connections, so that he sort of was able to make that work, and it was a popular place to go. So that was for some years, got and but uh, there was one in particular, and I know Johnny Bolin can help me on this on the name of the place. Can't recollect, but it was after my grandfather's club. So my grandfather passed away, and the club closed down, and then there was another music club up the street from where my grandfather's club used to be, and the guy, his name was Wardell, and I forget the name of the club, but he's carried on the thing of having music 7 nights a week, and he started hiring out all of us young guys. So Johnny, uh, Tommy, Bartle, some other guys in Sioux City at that time. We played regularly at his club, so it was primarily a black club. It was in the west side black section of town there, but everybody was welcome. The music was featured, and um, and so that was a great little scene. We had a place to play. We had a home. It was home. It was someplace to play.
So what year did your grandfather die? When did his club when he passed, I guess that was when it closed. When was that? Do you remember which year?
Okay, guessing it was like around. I think it lasted up into the early 70s, maybe 1970, 71, something like that.
So that then was until that happened. That was this kind of cocoon for you young guys to get a chance to get in there
Yeah,
and connect with these musicians.
yeah.
So, do you have a sense of when you met Tommy?
So we were in school at the same time. We were the same age. He went to a different high school, but like I said, the music community in Sioux City was small, so everybody knew each other. Um, uh, Everybody knew Tommy from some of the popular Sioux City bands that he played in. Patch of Blue was one popular band that I can recall right off the top of my head that he played in with the Larwick brothers, and I really loved Tommy's thing that he had, kind of thing, and it was he was so much into music and all kinds of music, and he was like a sponge. And uh, because my grandfather had music at his club, we kind of that's how we became friends. Was he wanted to come down and check it out and play? And the great thing about my grandfather was he opened up a place to play and welcome young musicians in. And we weren't even of the age to get in there legally to the club, but he allowed us to get in there and play, kind of looked after us, mentored us, gave us a place to play, kind of thing. And Tommy, I remember there were just a few guys that would come down, and Tommy was one of those guys that would come down and play and regularly um, for the period of time before Tommy left Sioux City.
So Johnny the other night mentioned early on when he was like 14 that he was in Harlem's Children.
Mhm.
Do you remember that group?
I don't remember the Harlem's Children. Um, no, I don't remember Harlem's Children.
Because I think that might have been before Patch of Blue. But I'm not sure.
Yeah,
So so when Tommy so I guess it's just like now, a musician who's really into it is going to figure out where they can go play.
Exactly.
They're going
Yeah.
to have their ear to the ground.
Yep.
Oh, and then they would hear that your grandfather, he would hear, I'm sure, that your grandfather's club.
Yeah. There wasn't that thing of and so so we're talking 60s, and that thing of with some of us that we just it was all about the music, so it wasn't about race kind of thing. uh, some of the guys like Tommy, it was chancy to come down to the black section of town and hang out and play, and but that was the only reason why we were there, was the music kind of thing, and all the other peripheral stuff that was going on we really didn't pay that much attention of. There were I have an oldest brother, and who played, he also was a drummer, and so Tommy was working with a little bit with my oldest brother and an organ player who was the oldest son of one of my dad's buddies, and they had a group that they played with, Harold Smith. And so Harold Smith Jr. and my brother was junior, had a group, and Tommy played with Harold and my brother during that time. And actually, I believe that's how I met Tommy, was through them and some of the groups that they had, and Tommy was um, playing in some of those groups. So they were playing um, R&B and some jazz kind of thing, and their music was more R&B jazz influenced kind of thing.
Do you remember a name or an incarnation of them?
Mm-hmm.
Was there a name?
Yeah, I got a poor recollection of that, Michael.
It's okay.
The one group that sticks in my mind was the two best guitar players, in my estimation, were in Sioux City during that time, was Tommy and John Bartle. And so they would play, if Bartle wasn't in the group, Tommy was in the group kind of thing. Um, the Blazes
Ah,
was the band with Harold Smith, and my brother was in that band, and Bartle was in that band, and I believe Tommy might have been uh, in there, in some form at some period of time.
so let's say you wound up. Do you have a recollection of the first time you were there when Tommy played, like a first impressions of what you wound up seeing him up there playing? You could walk in the room, whatever it was, and do you have a recollection of what you thought about him as a player?
It was probably, and I'm sure I saw a Patch of Blue, and it was probably I saw Tommy play for the first time before Patch of Blue, but I can't remember what group that was. I do remember Patch of Blue, and they were very popular in Sioux City, and they played around a lot, and got a chance to go hear Tommy, and we were all friends, and the Larvick brothers and stuff like that. So um, I I mean, Tommy had a special thing early on, even, that everybody really noticed that there was something special about Tommy, about the way he played, about his his openness just to things, and also his dedication to what he wanted to do. He knew what he wanted to do.
So, do you have a sense of was he manifesting that at 14?
Yeah,
Because yeah, he would have left like right when the not that far after being 14.
yeah, because he was. I don't know if he was 16 when he left. I'm estimating that was like around 16 years old when he left Sioux City
Might have
for
been either
Denver.
right before or after he turned 16.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
because I believe it was the winter, because that's when Jeff's story picks up.
Hmm.
And it was a cold, snowy night in Denver.
Hmm.
And when Tommy had just gotten there. So it must have
Yep.
been, I'm assuming, and Johnny can maybe help, right after he had turned 16. Although there's some perspective that maybe it would have had to have been the year before, though. He would have had to have just turned 15. It's one or the other.
Okay, because I know he didn't finish high school, and
Right.
it was like he'd already decided music is this has got to work because I'm all in, kind of thing. And I believe it was 15. I didn't want to say that because I'm not sure, but I think the timeline is about right. And you can corroborate that with Johnny and some other people.
So then, how long had you known him, would you say, or experienced him as a musician before he left?
God, I would say a good 4 years, something like that, to be safe, kind of thing of playing
Like
around at 15. So, I
11,
mean,
11,
it's hard
12?
to, it's hard to because we started early. 12 definitely we were all playing at 12, 13 years old and doing gigs and stuff like that. High school gigs, whatever there was to do. We were club gigs. We were doing club gigs, um, whatever there was to do.
So he you guys may have played in your grandfather's club when he was 12, potentially 13.
Yeah, because I was around 12 when I started playing in my grandfather's club.
And was Tommy around then, or was it shortly thereafter that you would?
Shortly thereafter, yeah,
So yeah, that would mean 12.
yeah.
So I think so much isn't known about how developed Tommy was. What was he playing? I know Patch of Blue was kind of a band sound.
Mhm.
I'm assuming there's some that's kind of it. I've always been curious about him, soloing. When was he? Do you remember him at 12 already commanding the stage with taking a solo?
Yeah, so what I was impressed with Tommy. So we had a group of a couple of guys that were kind of. There was one guy named Clark Lewis, and Tommy was real good friends with Clark. Clark was a little older than us. Clark had a library of the blues that was incredible. And we would go over to Clark's parents' house and sit and just listen to. Clark turned us on to all the blues artists, all of the early old blues artists. I mean, he was really aficionado, and he was a young guy too, but really knowledgeable. There was his brother, Steve Lewis. So that's how I got together with Tommy was through the Lewis brothers. Now it's coming back to me, and it was all centered around getting together over at Clark Lewis's house, listening to the blues. And so that is the thing that I think made Tommy stand out among guitar players was, and especially rock players, was his he came from the blues in his soloing. It was, and you can hear that in his playing is that blues influence in his playing. I used to say that if it doesn't have the blues in it, I can't use it. But Tommy really had a command of the blues, and his when he got out of Sioux City and went to Colorado and started branching out there and playing with different people, he even got even more blues influence because now he was starting to see guys coming through Colorado, Muddy Waters, and all the blues artists, and Tommy was definitely there, absorbing it all.
So at 12, 13, the blues is known obviously as an emotional format.
Yeah,
and the great players are able to convey the emotion that is
yeah,
implicitly in the blues. Was
yeah.
Tommy able to manifest that voice at 12 and 13?
Tommy had an incredible ear. Um, that was his asset. Um, in such a way that he would go because he really didn't take formal lessons, I don't think, but he was playing stuff that a lot of the guys that were studying and taking formal lessons and stuff like that weren't playing. You know, his thing was all from his ear, from what he absorbed and what he felt. You know, was his emotion. Um, he he paid attention. It showed in his playing. He was doing that even at an early age. He had a distinctive sound. I believe it came from his influences that were different from just the. I know he was a big Elvis Presley fan, but he also loved the blues, and he absorbed that in his sound.
So he would then be playing the blues. All of a sudden, it comes time for the guitar player to solo.
Yeah,
And so he would, at 12, 13 years old, would the crowd, would the whoever was in the club notice? Were they like reacting? And
yeah, absolutely. And I can remember like the group that I remember him playing in, Patch of Blue. We weren't a blues band, you know, but Tommy brought a different sound to that music kind of thing. In Sioux City, there was a thing, we used to call it the Sioux City Shuffle. So in blues, there's a lot of shuffles. And so we were all really into playing shuffles, you know, back then. Even Tommy, you know, we called it the Sioux City Shuffle. Felt that we had our own brand, our own way of playing a shuffle kind of thing.
so, how often would you say, and there's no way for you to probably have an exact number, but how many times would you say he was the guitar player, you were the drummer in whatever, whether it's a jam or a band or whatever it was, where you guys were laying it down and doing songs?
Mhm. You know, never was in a band with Tommy in Sioux City, but at jam sessions and things like that, mostly.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
so how about those? Let's just talk about
okay.
just. I'm going for just your own, because obviously it's so interactive, and when musicians are inspirational back and forth, it just creates this thing.
Yeah.
The thing occurs and happens, and that's kind of what I'm looking for here. Is just you having early remembrances when you did jam with Tommy.
Yeah.
Did you feel
So
more pulled or more, or there was something special going on?
I felt like he was a guy that I wanted to play with, you know. He was a guy that I enjoyed playing with because there was just more. He was had something different in his style of guitar playing. Um, two guitarists that okay, three that I really loved in Sioux City and loved their playing. Tommy was one who was probably one of the first guitarists, and then a couple of others after that. So uh, I didn't get in a band with Tommy until much later. I moved to New York. I was living in New York City, and Tommy would come out quite quite often to New York. And whenever Tommy would come out, um, I would see, he'd give me a call and we'd hang out. We had a mutual friend uh, uh, that we'd all get together and hang out. And Tommy said, "Hey, why don't you come to Colorado and join my band?" And so it was like taking a chance. It was an opportunity, and so that was the first time I had an opportunity to play in a band and play some regular date gigs and with Tommy.
So
But that was later on.
let's back up into that New York situation. So were you able to get yourself situated, or you were playing at all out when you moved to New York?
I wasn't playing all that much, but I was playing a little bit, kind of thing. And so I had an opportunity to. There was a band called Dreams, and the lead singer for that band was a guy named Eddie. I forget Eddie's last name, who I knew a little bit. Um, Asked me, they needed a drummer, I guess for a casual or something. We call them casuals, private party or whatever. I forget, a wedding or something, you know. So I said, yeah. And he said, well, here's the address of the loft down in the village. You know, come down there. So I did. And so the uh, it was Billy Cobham. I was subbing for Billy Cobham. And I walked in the door. Nobody else was there. Billy was playing. And I had a Dreams album that I had gotten in Sioux City. So I knew who these guys were, and I was totally floored. But that was my first uh, meeting with Billy, and played that one date with for subbing for Billy Cobham. I was scared out of my mind because he asked me, well, he got up from the drum set and he gave me the sticks. Oh, you're subbing for me? Yeah. We'll play something, you know? And it was like, and after hearing him just play, it was like I was so intimidated, but I did the best I could. And he said, yeah, you can play. He goes, you should get some experience. That was his advice. So,
So who was that mutual friend?
his name was Eddie. The mutual friend that Tommy would come to
Yeah.
see.
Yep.
Philip Palamini and James Palamini.
Ah, Philip.
And they used to live in Sioux City. And they were my buddies, and as well as Tommy. So we all kept in touch. And Philip and Tommy were really close. And so we all hung out whenever Tommy would come to New York City. I think he invited me to Electric Ladyland. He was recording there, something like that. Hung out with him then.
Do you remember what year that was? When did you move? First of all, when did you move to New York?
God, that was all like early 70s, maybe like 73 or something like that. 72, something like that.
Because I know he went to New York before that, and I
Yeah,
wonder if that was because of Philip.
yeah.
But Kenny Passarelli has a story about. I think it was when Zephyr was happening, when Tommy and Kenny went to New York and stayed with Jeremy Steig.
Jeremy Steig, yeah. And Eddie Gomez,
Yep,
Don Hammer.
yep. And then Jeremy had just done the album Energy,
Yeah,
which is of course where the band name Energy came from.
yeah.
So that's fascinating. So Dreams was still happening then in '73 or so, because Cobham's on record saying that's when he first saw Tommy play. He said it was in '69.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was the Watkins Glen Festival, but it
Mm-hmm.
was one of the big festivals where there were so many of them exploded in '69,
Yeah,
and that's when he first saw Tommy. He was in Dreams,
yeah,
and Tommy was in Zephyr.
yeah.
And that was where Billy first went, what?
Yeah.
And so
And
this is fascinating that you're part of that New York. I didn't
mhm,
have that awareness.
yeah.
So do you remember any gigs or him playing out at any of the clubs? I know they played Slugs, and or was this before you went to New York, perhaps?
Uh, I don't think when uh, I don't recall. I used to go to Slugs a lot, but I don't recall ever seeing Tommy there.
Well, it was
It
on one
was
of those few trips. There was one or two
just a
trips.
trip when he would be out recording or something like that, and we'd get together when he had some downtime and hang out.
So I know that Cobham, I think it was there were a couple songs that we wound up putting out through the archives that were demo sessions at Electric Lady,
Hmm.
and Cobham had gotten a demo offer from Columbia. So the songs were Billy, Tommy, Yan, and Jeremy, and maybe
Hmm.
Eddie,
Hmm.
Sister Andrea, and another song. And they didn't get the deal. And I guess Billy, this would be interesting to go over this with Billy. I think then he then got a deal to do Spectrum. And did you watch all of that interview, the whole thing with
I
Narada?
did. Yeah.
Him going to his brain finally just went, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And that's when they reformed and Narada would have come in. And that's when I always thought that Billy wanted to do something more accessible with Spectrum.
Hmm.
And it turns out that he didn't want to recreate Mahavishnu.
Yeah.
He wanted to do something. But that just blew my mind. Narada's trying to get him to talk about MO,
Right.
as Billy said. And he goes, wait, well, before that, and actually it happened after that, he had to talk about Tommy first.
Yeah.
So part 2 of that exists, and I guess that's going to be put out. And I'm assuming then he will go even more into talking about Tommy.
Yeah.
But, anything more about being in New York there? I mean, did you go to the studio?
I did. And so maybe now, because you kind of have a timeline, I remember going to Electric Ladyland. Tommy was recording there. So maybe that was with Cobham. Tommy invited me to the session. Myself and Dennis Kelly, we were roommates there. Um, Hung out with James and Philip. So maybe that was the session with Billy Cobham, although I don't remember that for
If
some
we sit here
reason.
long enough, it may come up because, because you were obviously already so. It has to be somewhere recessed in the old closet in the
Yeah.
back of your mind.
Yeah.
Who were you seeing Tommy
Yeah.
record with?
Yeah. You know, I was I was thrilled that Tommy had hooked up with those guys, Jeremy Steig, Jan Hammer, Eddie Gomez, who was the bassist with Bill Evans for a bunch of years, and jazz players. They were jazz players. I mean, back then they weren't just jazz players, right? I mean, a lot of times we get pigeonholed as like if you're out playing rock, it's like that's all you play, or you're a jazz player and that's all you play, kind of thing. And uh, those guys weren't like that, and they brought Tommy in to their circle, which was uh, all the premier New York guys then who weren't well known at the time, and who became, you know, very well known international virtuoso musicians who were some very deep cats musically.
Well, now you're forcing my hand. I'm going to have to see if I can do this with Jan because this is the kind of and Philip, I guess, is the missing link in terms of
Yeah,
really perhaps having the whole timeline. And of course,
absolutely.
he's not available
Right.
anymore. Is his brother?
I haven't heard from James and since I left New York. I would hear from Philip, but I hadn't heard from James, and so I don't know. I don't know.
Because now this whole New York thing is like you've just stoked it up into the embers are getting hotter. How did that all when did that start? And again, it may have been if Philip. Do you have any idea when Philip left? Was his dad in the military? Was that the
I don't
thing?
recall that, but I
I
know
think
they
that
lived
I
for a
think
period
that's
of time in Sioux City, and maybe his
right.
dad was in the Air Force because there were Air Force bases
Yeah,
around in the
but he
Midwest there.
but he was from New York. Is that
Yeah,
so? Then after that, he must have gone to New York. But you're saying they were already buddies in in Sioux City.
yeah.
Um, so I guess I want to go backwards here, back into the club situation with your grandfather's club and whatnot. So the blues piece, you've been really clear about how that was a
Mhm.
real inspiration. What about Tommy playing jazz?
I never thought of Tommy as a jazz player, but he had jazz influences is because he heard it and he would try things. And that sounded more like jazz than it sounded like a rock thing, which made him interesting to me because uh, I was, my dad and my grandfather were jazz musicians, and being grown up in that music kind of thing, most of the guys back then were strictly into rock and roll kind of thing. But there were just a few guys who were listening and checking that out, and wanting that influence in their playing. And Tommy was one of those guys, obviously, because of the way he played. You know, I always think that that's what made Tommy special in the rock scene, and the way he soloed and his expression and what he had to say in his guitar. It came from the blues, but in my estimation, it came from the blues in a rock style.
And I'm fishing for that he would have at least been playing songs that were associated with jazz in
Mm-hmm.
some of those jams
Yeah.
at certain times or whatever. That somebody would say, "Let's do whatever it would have been." And then you
Mm-hmm.
you talked about the night at your grandfather's club where there wasn't a headliner. So at that point, the you guys, quote unquote, you guys, and I don't know if that was the night in particular, but you were there where
Yeah.
they're up on stage playing, and can you tell that story about how then your grandfather went and got the trumpet? What would have drawn him to go do that, and maybe see if what all you can remember there in
Yeah.
terms of that
So
story.
any uh, thing that you hear that is like, it's like that's it. It's the groove, or it's someone playing a really nice, meaningful solo, or something like that. Something special about the music, and at that moment, um, uh, that my grandfather, if the band was cooking, if he was working, whatever he was doing, and the band was cooking, because he always had an ear on the music, whatever he was doing, he would just disappear into his office and then come out of his office playing. And it always made us all laugh, but because it was such a funny thing to see, but it was like his signature thing of, yeah, the music is happening, and he wanted to get parts of that, and there were a few nights when he would come out of his office, trumpet in hand, playing a solo. He'd start his solo in the office and come out and play, kind of thing, and there was interplay going on. So uh, I believe, and I never talked to my grandfather about that. Wish I had, before he passed away, like what he thought about Tommy, because he certainly liked him. He certainly recognized that Tommy had something.
So can you kind of maybe try to recreate what might have been the night you witnessed that one time in terms of what was going on in terms of
Yeah,
here's you come in the door or you're already there, and then and guys wind up being on stage playing.
yeah.
If you could kind of maybe try to recreate this in your words and how your grandfather would then.
We would get there. I mean, so the music probably started around, I don't know, 7 or to 9 o'clock window, and then it would go till 1:30 when they closed. We would generally get there towards the like 9 o'clock hour, we would plan to meet up there together. And then I even recall that my dad was the bouncer at the door. So, he would let certain kids in, and they were my buddies, Um, and the music was pretty much centered around the blues. Even if it was in a jazz context, it was the blues, Blues can be very infectious. And that's what we were doing back then was we were into the blues more than more than anything. I'm sure everybody had their personal interests and excursions and their musicality and stuff like that. But it was all about the blues then. There was a guy who my grandfather had. He was a piano player. I don't. He was an older man. Probably he was. I would guess he was in his. He seemed old. He was probably in his 30s or something. But a piano player, and he played there regularly during that. I remember his name was Floyd. I can't remember his last name. Character, total character, and so for piano players and guitar players, they have to share the harmony, and so it's like they don't want to be fighting over the harmony. It's like, okay, you play, I'll play, you play, I'll play, kind of thing. Tommy had a way of staying out of the way of the harmony and being able to find his spots there where it's kind of like call and response kind of thing, rather than he's playing chords and piano players playing chords, and they might not be playing the same inversion, chord inversions and things like that clash. That's what I loved about Tommy, and I think that's what my grandfather heard in that the groove was there. It wasn't chaotic, um, and that was it. If the groove's there, it's not chaotic. People are enjoying themselves. Um, there's some excitement in the room. That's what he dug, and he would come out and want a little piece of that.
This whole imagery of you said it's a small room. It's not really a stage,
No,
but music's happening, and all of a sudden you're hearing the trumpet, and your granddad is already playing and comes out the door, and he's just. It sounds like New Orleans.
well, he was from New Orleans.
I look at this. It's
Yeah.
just incredible.
So, and the Midwest had a really, because a lot of those guys that came up from the South, kind of like, and because of the packing plants and stuff like that in the Midwest, Chicago, and I mean all throughout the Midwest.
And Omaha too, right?
Yeah.
Chicago, Omaha, Sioux City.
Yes. Kansas City.
Yep.
Same thing. Those guys just stayed, and built a little niche for themselves there in the Midwest, kind of thing.
So your granddad, when was he in Count Basie's orchestra? Would that have been predating moving to Sioux City? Would that have been because he was in New Orleans? Is that how Count Basie would have known about him? I don't know if you ever heard the story, how that worked.
Well, so I've had to rely on articles. So I've Googled, my grandfather, and I've Googled Preston Love because they were buddies. And I found out more information about that from Preston Love. There's more press there about Preston, who talks about my grandfather and that period. So I believe that it was during the time that they were living in the Midwest, I believe, kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, their generation was 30s on kind of thing. Uh,
Okay, so there you go, the Depression.
hmm,
And between everything in the South, then the Depression was just like, there are no jobs
yeah,
because of historical issues as well as just reality. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
when I guess a lot of the migration occurred of the African Americans
exactly,
coming up north.
exactly. Yeah, that Great Migration, and that's how a lot of people just came from the South to the North, and centered in the cities of Chicago and smaller towns up Sioux Falls, Sioux City, Omaha. Definitely Omaha. Can't um, kind of thing. Um,
So,
my grandfather, I remember when I was a kid that when he was still on the road and he had his own orchestra, and he would hook up. I remember him hooking up it was like a U-Haul thing with all the band's instruments, and they'd pile guys into cars and they'd hit the road throughout the Midwest doing gigs and stuff like that.
so how large by the time you were born and your dad, so your dad, was he born in Sioux City?
He was, yeah,
So how big did the African American the black population become in Sioux City?
1%, I believe, something like that. Very, very small, uh, mostly centered on the west side of Sioux City. Um, and still to this day, I still am getting stories about uh, things. There's association, um, Sioux City African American Heritage Museum or something like that, and they're starting to publish a lot of history from way back in the day. And Sioux City was an interesting place because there were people that came out of Sioux City that went on. There were writers and some musicians and some really interesting people that came out as black people that came out of Sioux City. Um, the thing in my lifetime in growing up, and so I left Sioux City when I was right out of high school, and couldn't wait to graduate and get out. And Tommy got out before I did, and I was like, yes, yeah, Tommy, and I couldn't wait to get out too.
And so
So
why was Russell couldn't wait to get out? What would you say were the driving forces for you? It, because of who you are.
yeah, I felt like I my growing up at the time that I grew up in the 50s, 60s. Um, there were some really good people in Sioux City, and then it was really racist too, kind of thing. The whole thing of the uh, civil rights movement that happened that I was really watching and reading and hearing about and wanting to be a part of. And in Sioux City, Iowa, there wasn't much going on at that time, and wanting to, make a difference. But Sioux City having a small African American community, and outside of our west side neighborhood area, you had your one doctor and you had your one barber and you had your one jazz club and you had your, that kind of thing. It was small. Our world was small. And I just couldn't wait to get out into the world and head to the big city.
So again, how many Anglo musicians wound up coming to the West Side, coming to the club, bothering? not bothering, but being drawn to
Mm,
to the African American, the black part of town? How
mm,
many angles were on that list?
yeah. Well, there were more than I realized, and I would hear when I go back to Sioux City, like before pre-COVID times when the Bolin Festival and stuff like that, and I would talk to somebody that said, "I remember your grandfather's club. I used to go there. My dad used to go there. My whatever kind of thing." So there were people that um, white people that would come down there and frequent and that kind of thing. And uh, I mean, my grandfather, the way he was just very welcoming kind of guy. My dad, same way. Um, uh, you couldn't, you weren't uh, like you can't be here kind of thing. It's like yeah, come on in, have a drink, have a good time, kind of thing. They came for the music and the drink and maybe I don't know that have their experiences, with African American people, kind of thing. It was kind of a funny thing how people got together during the '60s and how they didn't, kind of thing in Sioux City.
So was Tommy's engagement pretty much just as a musician coming in and playing, or did he wind up having? Yeah, I mean, you guys were friends,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And Tommy was friends with other black musicians. I mean, that was that's how we got together. It's music brought us together. I remember Tommy Jerry Smith. You brought his name up, and his older brother was Harold Smith, and a couple of other black musicians our age. There weren't a lot of guys. I think you could almost count them on one hand. The black musicians that were playing that grew up there. There would be guys that would come through there, but the guys that grew up there, just a handful of guys, that could play, that could get any gigs. Number one, because there weren't a lot of gig opportunities for black musicians, kind of thing. And that's why I was fortunate that my grandfather happened to own a jazz club and happened to be supportive of me to be able to get some experience and play.
So would that have been the only black-owned venue or club?
As far as I know,
Because Johnny talked about that there were 50. Not that they all had live. I don't know if they all had live music or not, but that in the '60s, Sioux City just had a huge bar club scene
mm-hmm.
in general.
I don't know how many black owned businesses because I can't think of much
You
outside of two.
you would have known.
Yeah,
How could there's no way you wouldn't
yeah.
have.
And there was only one area that they could do business in. So,
So was it all redlined like that, where
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
you weren't going to be able to get a lease or get a loan or?
Yeah, I mean, it was the West Side.
Yeah, yep.
And it was, the West Side was mixed. Um, so our neighborhoods were mixed neighborhoods.
Was that where Tommy's family lived when they were in the small house? Was that the West Side? Johnny knows, but
Yeah.
I'm,
I
I'm
believe it was considered the North Side, but yeah, I'm not sure.
so so um also there's also a thread that we're working, which would have been, and I asked Johnny, he didn't have a recollection, like drug usage. Like, did Tommy take acid in Sioux City? Because Johnny talked about the hippie. There was a head shop, and there was a hippie scene, a little hippie that was
Yeah,
pretty vibrant, and that Tommy was also drawn
yeah,
to that.
Yeah.
And then there's marijuana, and there's cocaine, and
Yeah.
heroin.
Yeah.
And obviously, 14-year-olds aren't supposed to be doing that, and probably aren't. But but is there what can you share about the reality of what was going on that way?
All that was going on. I like all the hippies. It was kids that went away to school other places and came back, and that kind of thing. And they were really cool. And like the whole thing. Okay, so my grandfather's club and those people who were older and doing their thing. There was always drugs. There was always, of different varieties that you could probably get there, kind of thing. I remember one of my friends asking me, could I get him some weed? You know, I was in high school at the time. I didn't smoke weed in high school, and it was like because I knew there were all kinds of colorful characters that went to my grandfather's club, and you could go and get you a girl there, and that kind of thing. I even named one of my first bands after a prostitute who used to hang out at my grandfather's club, and her name was Pauline. So I named my band Jazzy Pauline in honor of Pauline because she was like a strong, fiery character, so all those things were there in Sioux City. The thing is it had always been there since the 30s,
Yeah.
when it was legal, when marijuana and cocaine was legal, and then there were juke joints and stuff like that going on. My mind was blown. It was like our grandparents knew how to party, back in the day, um, kind of thing.
And you were going to the Catholic high school, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how strict did they try to be?
Oh, yeah. They tried to be as strict as possible without getting arrested.
Were there yardsticks and
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
rulers and
yeah. That was back in the day when if you did get and hit over the head with whatever, I got hung up in the closet by my jacket by a big old nun who was like probably from a farm somewhere. She's big and strong, 6 foot something. I don't know what I did, but hung me up in the cloakroom by my jacket and closed the door and walked out. Um, the thing is my dad his attitude was, well, what did you do to deserve it? Kind of thing. So you didn't get a break.
would that being hung in the closet be applied more to the black kids? Were white kids ever hung up in the closet?
I don't know, but there was some racist stuff. Yeah, and going to high school and going to school, and I went to pretty predominantly white schools.
Yeah, well,
So it was,
when I saw that you went to the Catholic school, I thought that has to be primarily white for sure.
yeah,
That
yeah,
you were getting a
uh,
better education, quote unquote.
yeah, yeah. My grandmother wanted us to go to Catholic school, and so what she said goes, and whether we wanted to or not, all of my friends on the west side all went to public school, went to Central, where Tommy went, which was much more mixed there. Not so much the high school that I went to. It was like in 60s, so I had some experiences, with racism and things like that. I was voted homecoming king in 68 in my high school, and it made some national magazines and stuff like that. I don't think I was the first, but I don't know, it was like newsworthy. But I had death threats, uh, kind of thing happening at that time. Um, there was racial tension between the public school, Central High School, and my high school, the Catholic high school, which were very close together, and most of the black kids went to Central, and there were maybe 5 black kids that went to Catholic school. So there was a little tension there, happened there, that happened to put me in the middle of it as to be the spokesman for something that I refused to do based upon look at what all we've done for you kind of thing. It's like
So you were asked to witness for the
I
high
was
school about the Catholic school was.
I was asked to be a mediator for talking to the community of black kids that were offended by some racial stuff that had happened during that time, and was asked by the superintendent of the school to be the mediator and kind of calm things down when it was a very offensive thing. I refused to do it, kind of thing. The Midwest, Iowa, there's like some of the best people that I know, and maybe being fortunate, I had lifelong friends there. Uh, we had, there's a lot of reservations around in and around Sioux City. I had Indian friends, white friends, and from different ethnic groups and stuff like that. Black friends, different kinds of friends, and the things that bring people together, and the things that separate people.
Well, fear's the big one, right?
Fear and ignorance.
Yeah, that there's a powerful combination.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, so
so with
it's
what
sad to go back and see Sioux City and to see how there are no black musicians that I see playing or in school playing or anything like that, and that's very sad.
so when the overall when Sioux City started shrinking and what all created the boom started
Yeah,
retracting over the decades, evidently a lot of the African Americans left
yeah,
because if there's not jobs, and I
yeah,
suppose if the amount of jobs drop down, they may be more likely to go to whoever will take this low paying job. If you're
exactly.
white, I guess you would get it.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean,
So you mentioned that the jazz club represented reality, prostitution, drug usage, having a good time, not being constricted by the conservative kind of mores that get projected down onto society. Oh, you're supposed to be this way, you're supposed to be that way. That, in fact, your grandfather's club was a representation of a reality that totally
yeah,
existed everywhere
absolutely,
that wasn't in that box.
absolutely. I
So,
mean, couldn't avoid it. I mean, that was society, and all the different personalities and the characters. I mean, I that was my first job, was sweeping floors and washing dishes, and there at my grandfather's club. And I was really young, but definitely watching the adults, carry on, and you know,
watching the adults, you were in the
doing
middle of it,
some characters, kind of thing. Um,
and you
that
were and you were trusted because of it's your
yeah,
granddad's business, and this is all what's going on. So
yeah,
Russell was just Russell.
yeah. So it's definitely not did grow up sheltered in how people act, and I've seen many alcoholics and drug addicts, and the funny thing was Floyd, the piano player that I was talking about, that was much older than us, that we got a chance to play with him. was a heroin addict before I even knew what heroin was really. And the story is that he was doing an arpeggio, and he nodded out in the middle of his arpeggio and busted his head open on the end of the piano, and they had to take him to the hospital. So we got a chance to finish the night because Floyd was, off getting patched up. The story was as he told the doctors that he could get better drugs on the street than the ones that they gave him to fix him up for his pain.
So was Tommy there that night in terms of?
I believe he was. I believe he was.
So in other words, Floyd's heroin usage was not like a secret, was not hidden, wasn't,
No, it was well known.
and so Tommy would have known that as well.
Probably. Tommy's a pretty aware guy.
But I'm just trying. I'm just saying. I mean, if this was, and you said there was a couple times,
Yeah.
whatever, however many times where they
We
did
all
play
knew.
together.
We all knew. Yeah. We were all aware of the drug scene kind of thing back then.
And then obviously because of this nature of like your granddad's place, you're there, all these musicians are there, that whatever happened in there wouldn't have been viewed through a judgmental lens of that's wrong or that's bad. It just would have been viewed as, wow, look, this is happening here. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if that's that Tommy would have been exposed as you were to this kind of behavior, and that maybe there was a normalcy. Not that
Well,
it's normal, but it wasn't so
Yeah.
shocking, I guess, is the
it
question.
wasn't shocking. No. It was kind of my recollection of it was colorful. There were these characters that what made them characters kind of thing, and it was like in the instance of Floyd, he was a heroin addict, and he would get too loaded or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's Floyd being Floyd, kind of thing. But it wasn't like this shocking thing. My brother, I had a couple of nights that I would be able to play with my group of guys that I played with, and my brother was a saxophone player, and he was in my band, and I remember going to the gig. We didn't live very far from there. We walked to the gig. That he was too loaded to play. I don't know. He was drinking cough syrup or something like that. And we got on the bandstand, and he could not play. He couldn't hear his pitches.
Your brother?
Yeah, yeah, my middle brother. And I remember being like so mad at him. And he was my older brother. But it was my band, and I told him to hit the door because he just couldn't play. And so it was definitely my brother's couple of years, middle brother's 2-3 years older than I am. We were all aware of the whole drug scene and stuff like that. The hippie thing, there were hippies in Sioux City at the time. There were usually kids that went away to college and came back.
And acid didn't really hit the streets until
Oh, actually, it had.
it hadn't, or it had.
When we were in high school, yeah, it had. Yeah.
Was Tommy would have been there when acid hit Sioux City, or would he have been gone by then?
He's probably gone by then.
So you said you didn't smoke pot until after you graduated from high school. Do you have any sense of Tommy either drinking, smoking pot?
I have no recollection of that. None.
But he at least was part of a world where that was just
Along with it, kind of thing. I know when I came to Boulder to play in energy, that now it was prevalent. All the drug dealers wanted to be around the scene and around Tommy, and so it was really prevalent. at that time. That was my major exposure to that scene. It was, the Klingons that, that have not so good intentions, and they just want to be around the scene, they wanted to be around Tommy. And, and a lot of those guys were, all the big drug dealers in town wanted to be around the scene. And how do they get into the scene were the drugs.
So, how about in Sioux City during this high school time, girls? You mentioned the prostitution in the club, but do you have any recollection of Tommy? Um,
No, I don't, because we weren't there for all of that. That was there, you know. And I would believe that there were maybe a couple of women who were prostitutes. No, it wasn't like a big thing. It was Pauline and maybe one other. And
so I don't know if so. Gee, you named a group after. I mean,
I
did you
named a
did
group after.
did you get some education from this person?
I just would always see her, and she was always really nice to me. And her pimp was a character who was abusive and always, arguing with Pauline, and Pauline was so fiery that pimps are supposed to be able to control their women, and he could not control Pauline. And I thought, this woman is just like such a fiery person, individual. And I came out of the club, and they were in the alley and they were fighting. And the only defense that he had for Pauline, because she could probably kick his butt, was, "You getting jazzy with me, Pauline?" Because he couldn't shut her up. And I thought, I'd heard that term, and I thought that was so great that I named my band after Jazzy Pauline.
So again, this would have been some night when you were there. Either were you working or maybe playing, where you would witness something like this
I
outside.
was either, if I wasn't playing, then I was there to hear the music.
So is it possible you were with Tommy and he might have witnessed something like that as well? Or were you guys hanging close enough to where there might have been some occurrence that
Yeah,
was witnessed?
yeah. We never went there alone. Like, if Tommy were to come down to there, it was either with the group. It was with John Bartle and or George Larvick. Kind of like it was two or three, four guys that would come together. Kind of thing. Um,
And how would they get there?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe
Would would
somebody's
rich would
car.
rich would parents be
Some
taking
parents
them?
did. Some parents did. Yeah. That my that knew my grandfather, and because he was a great guy, that they trusted him, trusted that he would keep keep us all safe. He had a big old police special underneath the bar. That was his peacekeeper, and he had a couple of really good big bouncers, that worked there. So he never wanted to have any trouble there because it was bad for business. And so
I wonder if there was another club in Sioux City where Tommy may have played more often within a jamming, hanging out situation versus your grandfather's place.
I'm sure, yeah,
That
I'm
there were.
sure, yeah,
And Bartle would know that. Did you? So you must have played out too in some other places, or not?
I did. I mean, John Bartle and I, we were pretty much started out together in the band context from the garage, and started doing gigs, and we did gigs on for many years in different situations and stuff like that. Uh, and John and Tommy were also very close. Um, there was, quite a few rock clubs that we used to play, and John Bartle kind of brought me into the whole rock scene, kind of thing.
So, is there any way to try to estimate an amount of times that you and Tommy might have jammed or played at your grandfather's club?
There was a period of time, not that long, maybe a couple of years or so, when that was the spot that we would all go to go play, to go hear music, kind of thing.
Would that be weekly? Um,
It
I mean,
was on every weekend, kind of thing, where it was for a period of time, stop in there, because there was a place you could go play and and then go somewhere else, kind of thing.
and you said that whoever was there, it was an all black audience.
Yes,
So I'm assuming then that that kind of club would always have some people in it. That
yes,
this was the heyday, well, later heyday of the lifestyle. Go hang out in clubs and drink
yes,
and
yes,
party.
yes,
And so Tommy then potentially guesstimating from what you said to maybe 7,500 times that over a couple of years potentially that was the destination
yes.
where this playing in front of a black audience would
Yeah.
have been just part of what was going on.
It was part of what was going on. As far as it's not. We talked about the music. Um, we never, that I can recall, it was like talked about race or anything like that. Those were my buddies. I remember doing gigs, and I had told this story to some guys, and they looked at me like, "Are you kidding me?" But it was like part of those times of I was playing with Bartle, and we would play these high school dances in these little towns in Nebraska and South Dakota and stuff like that, and getting escorted out of town by the police, um, being threatened because I was in the band and it was a black person in the band, and that was like just part of my story. That's what happened, growing up, just trying to play gig, in the Midwest. And my white friends that I told that story was like, "Do you remember?" And they would go, "No, we don't remember that. That's really messed up." It was like that's just what happened, kind of thing.
This I'm so I could uh, I I think most Anglos don't have a friggin' clue about what it's like to not be white and what that means.
Yep.
And
Unless you
so
travel to somewhere where you're
where you're
not.
the only white person,
No.
go to Africa or whatever.
Yeah.
So any other memories of music being played, created at your grandfather's club? Is there any other or composite of what you remember about?
Hmm.
Was Tom? Let me ask within this context, were you ever aware of Tommy bringing a musical idea in that wasn't a song that was already known, an original idea that he would be playing, or you get you guys to play with him?
Not that I recollect. It's not like it didn't happen, though. It's just that I don't remember. There's been so much music between then and now.
No, infinite, I'm sure. But just maybe it would have stood out. That's the only thing I'm thinking. This is the other thing I'm trying to make a connection. When did he first manifest creating something original? And Johnny didn't really remember. Bartle
Mhm.
probably might.
Bartle might. I know him, John and and Bolin were, very close. I mean, they were the two guitar players there in Sioux City. I often thought that John would, you know, have the success that Tommy enjoyed. It just didn't happen for John in the way that it happened for Tommy. Um, I
They
believe
still,
that their styles were similar in a certain way, and I think that it was because they shared a common background, in the blues, and you know, I mean, maybe it's because I grew up with those guys, and I don't think so. I believe that I'm pretty objective about musicians and their sounds and their styles and things like that. But I think, well, it's proven that Tommy is a very unique guitarist, and he became um, like there's all these other guitarists that kind of spawned out of that Spectrum album, and I could name, all those guys, and they're all excellent, successful guitar players.
let's
Tommy did it for them,
let's
The old,
stop let's stop right there for a moment. I want to see. I'd like to keep going, but I wanted to see if you'd like to take maybe a 5 minute break. I know I'd like to go pee.
okay,
And if you're into continuing, I think now we can transition into, once Tommy left Sioux City and your engagement with
that's a
him.
good idea. That's a good idea, Michael.
So I think, yeah, because I think I feel good about how I'm like a gold miner here. And I'm trying to, you know, mine for the gold. And I think I've done a pretty good job of helping you come up with stories that are and facts that are relevant to this new narrative that
Yeah,
just popped out of the sky. And I think that maybe 7,500 times playing in the club, I can see that as a real core piece of how this would wind, assuming we get it to happen.
sure.
And I just think right now the whole, Hollywood is so much more aware of the systemic racism and how everything's been represented in such a, distorted way for so long, that to come up with a story about Tommy that then shows this reality,
Yeah.
I think it really
Well,
is a positive thing.
I would like to talk more about that because I think that that's what made Tommy unique amongst a lot of guys. Uh, and I'd like to talk about that. I have talked about that with other musicians. If that's what made Tommy different for me personally, kind of thing. So I could use a break though.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, I'm gonna go.
5 minutes or so, whenever. I'm gonna
Okay,
go ahead and pause this here.
okay.
Paused. Recording restarted. I my career, I did a lot of big concert shoots and worked with a lot of big people, and it all really began for me because I had met Tommy in Boulder, and he had blown my mind, and it just pulled me more into music. And in my doing all the shoots I did, I was always cognizant that Tommy died before shooting artists live had become common, and that anything where he was shot, like the Deep Purple and the James Gang on Don Kirshner's rock concert,
Mhm.
it was horrible. There
Mhm.
was no accuracy, there was no featuring of him, and I was always so appalled by all that I made a personal pledge. Whenever I shoot a guitar player, I'm gonna make sure I shoot the hell out of the guitar playing.
Yeah,
And it was all because of Tommy and my love for him. So he had everything to do. And so then I got to shoot a lot of people, but I got to shoot. I got the Allman Brothers when Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks. I got to shoot Willie Nelson at Billy Bob's, which is the honky tonk in Fort Worth.
Mhm.
And of course, Trigger, his Martin with the hole in it. And Willie is such a great lead guitar player. And that's never what gets talked about, for musical people, they know,
Sure.
but it's never what gets talked about. And so I did that shoot and I followed through on my pledge. And 2, 3 years later, I got to do another shoot in Hawaii at Jack Johnson, the rock singer songwriter guy who lives in Oahu,
Mhm.
did a festival every year to support environmental awareness. And he would pull all, national acts, but then the best of the acts that lived in Hawaii. Willie has a jam band that only plays in Hawaii. And he plays a turquoise Telecaster.
Mhm.
But anyway, point is, I got to go backstage and say hi. And he went, I really like that DVD you did. It's because I shot the guitar well. And so I did and I could root that all back to Tommy, in
Yep.
terms of just my own inspiration.
Yep.
And so to have you be working with you here right now within this is an opportunity that we're now creating, our team, and that I get to do this right now, and that I get to do this with you, and we're talking about what we're talking about is deeply thrilling to me, Russell. And I just want you to know that this is personal for me, and I'm like figured out how to get it to this point, and it may just actually, I don't know, we'll see. But David really does know the people David really knows.
Yep.
And Karen, they're ready to go. She's turned her back on this completely. And now she's going through all the memorabilia. They're stepping into it. And David had wanted her to do this. And now we've got a vehicle to write an entirely new Tommy Bolin story that we will then be able to show to the writer director once we get somebody teed up. And I think what we're creating here in this story, and with your contribution, it just changes everything in a dramatic way. In terms of, can you get people interested?
Yep.
Can you get people excited? Can you get it to happen? One of the most difficult things in the world would be to do what we're trying to do without us already being successful movie
Sure.
producers. But with Johnny and Karen and then Dave, but the key is building the manuscript to just be friggin' amazing. And this whole piece that you're filling in the blanks for, I think is just massively important. So thank you, Russell, for.
Well, thanks for asking me.
So let's start with that before we get into the specifics of Boulder and New York or whatever. Just what is Russell's opinion of how could Tommy meet a Billy Cobham, create a new band with Narada, Norma Jean, and Reggie McBride when it's his first shot at putting a band together and 3 out of the 5 members are African Americans? How is it that Tommy, what's your take on how Tommy became that Tommy?
Yeah. I think Tommy was always that person, that kind of person. He was different in that way. He was different at the time in that way in the 60s and the 70s. As far as the people that he played with, he just wanted to play with good players. That's evident, and the people that he's played with, the people that he's recorded with, kind of thing. That started early on. It was never a barrier. He wasn't. He was a rock and roll star who, in the rock and roll business, and the way that music has been categorized throughout time, and how they market to certain groups of people. Um, that is the science of music. I remember when there wasn't a science of music, but that I was aware of. And I'm speaking of like being in San Francisco and going to the Family Dog and Bill Graham's places, and you could see Small Faces and The Who and Arlo Guthrie and then Keith Jarrett and Miles Davis and Charles Lloyd all in the same bill. So you went for The Who and you came away with Charles Lloyd and Miles Davis, and then you got exposed to something that you didn't go there for, but that it was like, wow, you know, and that was really cool. That's what I really liked about those times that are kind of missing now. Tommy, early on, it didn't, it wasn't, what it connected to how music is marketed. So R&B is like predominantly black music. Rock and roll has become predominantly white music. No, it doesn't mean like uh, it's it was hard at one point in time for there to be um, a mixed band kind of thing because people worried about can we get gigs that people aren't going to accept that, you know, kind of thing. Um, so there was that thinking amongst those people who were promoting an act or something like that. I've been told that it's like, well, you know, what are we going to do with the black guy in the band, you know, kind of thing, you know, in a rock and roll thing. Tommy was not like that. He was very special in that way that I recognized early on, and he offered me an opportunity to come and play in his band. And he was very generous with me, and uh, and then to see how it was more about if there was he had a vibe with you, and most importantly, can you play, kind of thing. That I think that was afforded to him too, uh, and he just was that way. I think he was totally unique in that way, that he shared his music and he shared his musical experience, and he liked you. If he liked you, he liked you, you know, kind of thing. And you're, you know, come on in, you know, and hang, whatever. Um, I know a lot of it's what people don't know or don't recognize or don't even see about Tommy, which what made Tommy different. And they recognized that Tommy was different. You know, he was different in his music. He was different in his style and the way he dressed. He'd wear big pimp hats, and I remember when he started wearing pimp hats because that's what the old blues guys wore, those big pimp hats. And Tommy made that part of his style. And I used to laugh because I was like, Tommy, that's a pimp hat, you know. And but that's was part of his expression, whatever he was trying to say, fashion wise or what have you, kind of thing. And it came from the blues, you know, and how those guys dressed and that kind of thing. And he just mixed it up in his own personal style. Um, he and the way he treated me and brought me in. I mean, I was not so much looking to play rock and roll, and you know, I was more into jazz. And he said, "Hey, man, why don't you come to Boulder and you know play with me?" You know, and it was and I was like, Tommy, I don't know anybody in Boulder, man. What would I do in Boulder? You know, and he would always say, "Don't worry about it." And uh, so I picked up and moved to Boulder. So
Was that in 72? Because he
That was
left Zephyr at the end of 71.
it was between the time when there was a period of time when Bergie wasn't his drummer for that period of time, and that's when I came in and did some gigs with him, recorded that one Live at Ebbets Field record with him, and that was both me and Bobby at the time. But Tommy and Kieran were the only people that I knew, and Stanley because we rehearsed, you know. But I'd go over to their apartment there. I believe it was off of Table of Mesa or something like that. We'd sit in his music room and just talk, listen to music, mostly listening to music and sharing ideas and stuff like that. It's like, hey, Tony, this is what I'm into. Listen to this, you know. And you know how you want to share something that you really like with someone and they're not really paying attention because I'm not really into that, you know, kind of thing. But he would sit and he would hunch over and he would just listen, you know, whatever it was. Yeah, I mean, if it was something he didn't like, he would tell you that he didn't like it, you know. But he was totally open. That's when I really got to know Tommy because it was just sort of him and I, and he was a friend, you know, that he brought me there to Boulder, and being that he was the only one that I knew, and Karen spent a lot of time with those two on a personal level, as well as it was all about the music too. His I don't think that a lot of people in the whole rock scene, it's like this how do I say, a white dominated genre, and he broke that mold. People that want to be like Tommy or want to do something similar to what Tommy did. Number one, in their style is it's like the element that's missing is the blues that Tommy had, and just the way the scales that he played blues scales more than just rock scales. I mean, you listen to what every guitarist that I've ever heard of that heard that Spectrum album, they were just completely floored. It was like, who is that? You know, who's that guy? And that is totally burning, you know. Jazz guys, was like, that is a totally burning solo. And his sound, he could play one note and it was like so meaningful, you know, kind of thing. It came from the blues. And I think, as far as, in my estimation, a lot of rock players that noodle, play a lot of noodling notes that don't really mean anything, they're just a bunch of notes. The feeling of playing one note that Tommy could do, that he could just say that, and that said everything, you know. And he could also riff, kind of thing, but he wasn't just a riff guitar player. He could play some meaningful, lyrical solos, and I think that's what jazz players like out of Tommy being considered a rock player, kind of thing. We all wonder what would he be doing now, you know, what would he be playing now, kind of thing, because he was an explorer. He explored a lot of different stuff. He was into reggae, he was into some jazz, he was into, definitely into the blues, he was the rock stylings, uh, yeah, I just could only imagine what he would be into now, and also having the years behind it now, he would probably today have been playing upwards of 50 years, you know, and all that experience, and what he'd be doing right now. It'd be, it'd be incredible, I'm sure.
So let's In terms of when you moved to Boulder, and as you said, you were hanging out with Tommy and Karen a lot on a personal level. What at that point, Tommy had obviously become who Tommy was becoming. He was
Mhm.
maturing, and with his full personality, his full being would have been manifesting in his personality. What's a way to talk about Tommy in terms of his personality in Boulder at that time when you came and hung out with he and Karen a bunch?
Um, so I didn't. Tommy offered. He's like when he left Boulder, when he was leaving for LA, he wanted me to go with him. And it's like, hey man, let's go to LA. We'll get a place and do some stuff. I wasn't able to go, and so and that's when Tommy started with Deep Purple, playing with Deep Purple and that kind of thing.
So what
So
what
one of
was
those
it?
things,
Why couldn't you go, or why wouldn't you go? What happened there?
I got busted in Colorado, and so I couldn't leave the state.
So were you? What were? How did you get busted? What were you doing?
Oh, I was doing these gigs in Colorado. We were playing like a lot of these ski resorts. I met this guy, turned out to be a narc who befriended me, and it was over like a less than a half a gram of coke that I didn't even sell to him. It was like I got for him so he could take his trip, so he says. And so then a year later, I'm at a gig, and two DEA agents show up and arrest me for that, which got thrown out of court. But I had to go through the process of not being able to leave Colorado at that time, and kind of thing. That's why I didn't go.
So who were you playing with?
I was playing with different bands. I mean, I've always been a freelancer,
Yep.
but I played in a band with these guys from Little Rock, Arkansas. We were doing a lot of dates, but then I had my own band then, and then I was freelancing uh, between Denver and Boulder quite a bit with different people, kind of thing.
Who was?
I,
What was the name of your band?
Blue Plate Special
And
was the
who?
name of
And you
my
remember?
band.
And you remember who was in it? I mean, you
They
must.
were all Sioux City guys, mostly Sioux City guys. Uh, John Bartle for a little bit, and a guitarist named Roger Rothwell. You might have heard his name in Sioux City, maybe not. And Gerald Evans and Mark Engel and Archie Shelby, who played on that live at Ebbsfield record, percussionist. So, and I had that band going during the time that I was playing with Tommy too.
So let's talk about Archie a little bit. Who was Archie?
Archie was my childhood friend that I grew up with, and he lived around the corner from me. And uh, we were just thick as thieves. We like hung out a lot, from when we were kids to. And I brought Archie into Tommy and introduced Tommy to Archie and Archie to Tommy, and Archie's like being Arch. Archie was a great guy. Tommy just loved him. Johnny loved Archie. Everybody loved Archie. He was a total character. Um,
Was he a percussionist?
he was a percussionist, yeah,
Back in
and
the glory days of conga playing.
yeah,
Every band had to have a conga player.
Yeah.
Or
Tommy used to call Archie, introduce Archie as I've got bongos on my brain. Archie, I've got bongos on my brain, Shelby.
yep, yep. That's on that Ebbets recording.
Yeah.
And so he moved out here. When did Tommy ever play with you and Archie in Sioux City back in the day? Was Archie coming down and hanging?
Uh, it's possible. Archie kind of plugged in a little later. He was a couple of years younger, and I don't think he was really playing at that time. He was mostly singing and then picked up percussion or congas, later on kind of thing.
Because that Ebbets Field show is Ebbets 74. It was done in
Yeah.
74. And
Yeah.
he had, that was after he had already been in the James Gang
Yeah.
and after he had done Spectrum. So,
Yes.
does that mean you moved to Boulder in 73, 74?
Yeah. No, 73.
Because then Energy would have been broken up by then. Because
Yeah.
that's what
It
they
was,
petered out in late 72, early
yeah.
73. And then he did Spectrum and he joined the
Yeah.
James. Joe
Yeah.
Walsh got him the gig in the James Gang.
Yeah. But he was still doing gigs, energy gigs, during that time, although energy had disbanded. Um, when I came to Boulder, when he asked me to come to Boulder to play with him, it was still was playing his energy, and we used to play the Good Earth very frequently, and some other dates around that time, which called, and we play Ebbets Field too, which culminated in them recording that evening.
So Bobby had obviously he got Robbie Chamberlain out. He wanted Bobby to replace Robbie and Zephyr.
Yeah,
Then he quit Zephyr and Bobby quit to go with Tommy, and then they
yeah,
formed the original Energy.
yeah,
And again, they had about a 12-month or so life. And so when he got James Gang was either over or in between gigs or whatever tours, that he then didn't just have Bobby come back in. He placed the call to you
yeah.
for you to come out. So did he ever say what he was thinking in terms of why did he call Russell?
I don't know. I was like something one evening sitting around in when we were in New York. He just said, "Hey man, why don't you come to Boulder and play in my band?" And and I knew Bobby not as well as I know him now, but I knew of Bobby back then. It was like, well, yeah. Well, what about Bobby? I don't know what happened during that period of time.
So New York again. We were talked about that earlier, but do you have a sense of what year it is? Again, I'm asking again. I think that you moved to New York.
71, possibly 70,